Hi, welcome back to my channel. For those who don't know me, my name is Katharine, and in today's video I'm doing a quarter two reading check-in with the mid-year freak out book tag. Excited to be doing this book tag in order to update you on my reading so far this year. I can't believe it's already halfway through the year because it feels like 2025 just started. But let's just get into this. I got this specific book tag from Books R42. It's a blog online that I found. I'm sure there's a lot of other book tags with this same name on other blogs or on other videos, but I specifically chose this one because I liked the questions on this one the best. So let's just get into it. I have the questions right here on my phone. There is a total of 9 questions, and I'm going to start out with, what is the best book that you've read so far in 2024? Hi, Editing Katharine here. I just realized that I said 2024 instead of 2025. That's because the blog post that I got this from says 2024 and I forgot to say 2025 instead. So please forgive me. I might say 2024 a few more times in this video, but that's what I really meant to say is 2025 instead of 2024. Please forgive me. That's easy. It is What the Wind Knows by Amy Harmon. Amy Harmon did it again with this book. I read Where the Lost Wander by her last year, and it was my favorite book of the year in 2024. But for 2025, so far, Amy Harmon has done it again. It is definitely a contender for the best book of 2025 for me. I don't know what I'll read for the rest of the year, so we'll see if it holds up, but it is the best book of the year so far for me. It is essentially about a woman who's living in the year 2001 in New York City, and her grandfather was from Ireland, but he moved to the States when he was a young man at the age of 18. And essentially, her grandfather raises her because her parents had died when she was really young, and he teaches her the Irish language, which is Gaelic, and also just about Irish culture, Irish heritage, all of that. So she always really identified with Ireland and her Irishness, if that makes sense. So when her grandfather dies, which is really sad for her because he was essentially like the father figure in her life. And by the way, that's not a spoiler. That's literally in the synopsis of the book on the back. So that's not a spoiler that he dies, but essentially she goes back to Ireland to spread his ashes, and this lake that she spreads his ashes out on, that he specifically requested for her to do it on this lake, something mysterious happens, and she travels back in time from 2001 to 1921, which, for those who don't know, I didn't know this going into it, but 1921 was like a huge time in Irish history where the Irish were revolting against the English and like wanting to get their own country rather than being ruled by the English. So it's essentially this whole story about this girl who travels back in time in Ireland and like all of the things that she sees while she's, you know, in that time period in Ireland. And it's such a beautiful book. There is some romance in it, so definitely read it just for the romance. Like, yes, it's cool to learn about Irish history, and I honestly was inspired by this book to learn more about Irish history. So there's that. So if you are already interested in Irish history, read it for that, but the main thing that I liked about it was the romance, and it was just so beautiful, and it definitely is my favorite book of the year so far. Definitely check Amy Harmon out. Any of her books would probably be good. I've only read 2 of her books so far, but I can already tell that she's going to be a favorite author of mine. I like to give authors at least like 2 or 3 chances before I call them my favorite author, so maybe I'll read like one more book of hers at least this year to really make sure that she's like one of my favorite authors. But on to the next question. What has been your favorite sequel of the first half of the year? I would probably have to say not so much a sequel, but like a series, I should say, is the Mark of the Lion series by Francine Rivers. Francine Rivers is definitely one of my favorite authors. I've read a multitude of her books, and she just time and time again hits home for me. Like, she writes very deep books with a lot of Christian meaning, and I always have enjoyed her books. She is a Christian fiction author, for those who don't know, and one of my favorite books by her is Redeeming Love and The Masterpiece, but she did it again with this series called the Mark of the Lion trilogy. It's actually a trilogy. There's 3 books. It's not so much a series. Like, I feel like when I think of series, I think of like 4 or more books, whereas like a trilogy is obviously 3 books, a duology is 2 books. So I guess the Mark of the Lion trilogy is a trilogy because it has 3 books in it. So for this question, I'm answering it in terms of a trilogy. It's like a collection of books. And I think that counts for this question. And essentially this trilogy is about, I guess, it's kind of complicated. I don't know how to describe it. So each book follows someone different, but they're all kind of within the same universe. It's set in like the time period of Acts in the Bible, like the book of Acts in the Bible, where it's like, okay, Jesus has died and risen again, but at the same time, like, he's not like physically on earth anymore. So basically, like, the beginning of the Mark of the Lions trilogy like starts out with like the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and then it goes from there. So like the first book follows this girl named Hadassah, the second book follows someone else in the trilogy, and then the third book follows someone else in the trilogy. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not based on anyone in particular in the Bible. And that's actually what I like about it, because I've read some biblical fiction that has been a little iffy for me. Like, I feel weird reading Bible people, if that makes sense, outside of the context of the Bible, because a lot of these authors take creative liberty to like make them say certain things or do certain things that aren't necessarily in the Bible, and they just basically base their writing on like what they've done in the Bible and just kind of expand off that. But like, there's some things in biblical fiction where I'm like, would that person would have really said that, or like, would they have really done that? Because like, of course, these authors take creative liberty, like I said, to kind of make these characters, or not characters, these people from the Bible, like legitimate people from the Bible, say and do certain things that I'm just like, I don't know, like, would they have really done or said those things? But anyways, I like how these like people or characters in the Mark of the Lion series weren't based on like actual people from the Bible. They did mention John the Apostle like a few times, but like, he wasn't the main person or character in these books. So I really liked and enjoyed how Francine Rivers really developed these characters to face really hard things that were going on during this time for Christians, including like persecution and stuff. And when I was reading this whole entire trilogy, I always like was thinking like, oh my gosh, like I wish I would make decisions like this, or I wish I acted like this more just as a Christian. It inspired me to be a better Christian by reading this trilogy. I don't want to like go too much more into like what they're about. You'll just have to read it for yourself, because I don't want to give spoilers because it is a trilogy. But trust me when I say like you won't regret reading the trilogy. They are chunky books, and they also like go into really deep, hard hitting topics. But at the same time, you'll leave these books like feeling very inspired to be a better Christian. The next question is there a new release that you haven't read yet but you're really excited to? To be honest, I don't really follow like when like new releases are coming out. I only really like keep up with new releases if it's like a favorite author of mine, and like the authors that I do love, like they haven't really come out with anything recently. So like I can't really answer this question because like I just don't really keep up with like new releases. I'm more of a person where I'm like a mood reader. Like I don't read books just to read them if they're popular, or like if something new is coming out, or if someone tells me to read something because it's like super hyped up, if that makes sense. So like I'm not a big new release person in particular. Like of course, like I said, if there's like a really great author that I love, like Francine Rivers or Amy Harmon, who comes out with a new release, of course I'm going to pay attention to that, but they both don't have any books that are coming out that are like new releases. So I don't have an answer to that question, unfortunately. What is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? So I'm guessing this means like what book am I excited about getting to this year? Editing Catherine back here again, because I just realized that I misunderstood what that question was. It really meant like what new release is coming out in the second half of the year and if I'm excited for it. That's what that question meant. But like I said before in my previous question that I just answered, I don't really pay attention to like new releases at all. But let's head on to like the question that I thought was answering and my answer for that. And I would have to say The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, because of the fact that I'm a big historical fiction fan. Like that's probably my favorite genre if I had to pick one. But she has a lot of great, like, Kristen Hanna is known for like, what I'm trying to say is Kristen Hanna is known for writing historical fiction, and she is really known for The Nightingale. And there's another book called The Four Winds and The Woman. I think those are her like top 3 most popular books, but I particularly want to get to The Nightingale because it's like a World War II type historical fiction, and I really like World War II historical fiction. I know it's kind of cliche to like World War II historical fiction if you're a historical fiction type person, but I can't wait to get to that. It is a chunky book, but it definitely is something that I think will be worth it. People have just raved about this book and I've heard nothing but great things about it. What is your biggest disappointment so far? I guess I have like 2 answers to this question because it's 2 separate series, and I think I already answered this in my previous video for quarter 1, and I'll tag that video down below, but that's the Lord of the Rings series and also the Outlander series. Those are both like really beloved series, but I have just found that, first of all, I'm not a big fan of Diana Gabaldon's writing style for Outlander, because she's just very overly detailed, and I like historical fiction, and the Outlander series is considered historical fiction, but it's only necessary to include historical aspects to a book if it like makes sense for the plot, and I realize that, and she just adds a lot of unnecessary detail to it. Also, like, it's just very overly sexual for me. Like, I don't mind having like sex in books if it's for the plot, but she adds it for like spicy reasons and lustful reasons, and I don't appreciate that either. So the Outlander series is just not for me. I'm sorry if you like it, but it's just not for me, unfortunately. And also the Lord of the Rings series, I know that's also well beloved. J.R.R. Tolkien is considered like the father of fantasy, and like the Lord of the Rings series is considered like the foundation of like a lot of fantasy books. But I realized through reading this series, or whatever you want to call it, I don't know if it's considered a trilogy or a series, because if you include The Hobbit, it's considered a series because it's 4 books. But if you just count like the 3 Lord of the Rings books, it's a trilogy. Anyways, you know what I'm talking about. But I realized through reading it that I'm just not a fantasy person. I like things like Harry Potter, which is, I guess, considered middle grade fantasy, so maybe I'm just like a middle grade fantasy person and not a high fantasy person. But I just realized that I'm not like, I guess, a high fantasy type reader. Good for you if you enjoy it, but I just personally realized that it's just not my taste. I can appreciate it that it's a great work of fiction and that J.R.R. Tolkien has like a very creative mind, and I guess he's made like basically an empire out of it, but like it's just not for me, unfortunately. What is your biggest surprise so far? I would have to say The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. I picked up that book at a thrift store for like $2 or $3, and I have always just been interested in World War II historical fiction, and I heard some good things about it, but not like a lot of it about it. I was just like, oh, maybe I'll just pick it up because it's so cheap. And then I ended up reading it kind of like on a whim, I guess, at the beginning of this year in January. And I really enjoyed it. It was like one of the best books of the year. Like maybe not my favorite book of the year so far, but like it's one of the better ones, if that makes sense. I also watched the series and that they've made about it, and like it was moving. I definitely cried during that. And then going off of crying, I guess it's a theme for this video. What is a book that made you cry? And a book that made me cry, I don't really cry during books, to be honest. But I guess I'll count The Tattooist of Auschwitz as a book that I cried during, because even though I didn't cry during like the actual book, I did cry watching the series that they made about it, and it really solidified how much I enjoyed the book even more. A book that made you happy. I would probably have to say the Anne of Green Gables series, because of the fact that it just reminds me of spring. I read it between the months of April and May, and when I think of spring and like the Anne of Green Gables series, because I feel like they go hand in hand, they like complement each other, like the spring season and Anne of Green Gables. And it just made me feel like really great that the weather was warming up and that I can spend more time outside in nature, and it just made me really happy. Anne of Green Gables is such a magical environment or atmosphere to be in while you're reading it, and Anne herself is just like a very whimsical character, and she definitely reminds me of being a kid again. What books do you want to read by the end of the year? That's a good question. I actually have my TBR cart like right beneath you, like that's what my camera is propped up on. But I probably would have to repeat myself and say The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I know I said that was like my most anticipated read of the year for this year. I also want to read another Amy Harmon book this year, because I know I mentioned that earlier on too. The next book I probably want to read by her is From Sand and Ash, another World War II historical fiction book. I know that's probably a theme throughout this video. I also want to read another Francine Rivers books, because like I mentioned before, she's one of my favorite authors of all time. And the next book I probably want to read by her is called The Lady Is Mine. It's a kind of new release. I think it was released within the past like 5 years, and it's her newest release. Like she hasn't put out any more books like after that, so I definitely want to read that. It's another historical fiction book. Are you surprised? I also might want to read Chasing Shadows by Lynn Austen. She's another historical fiction author. I know, I'm a nerd and I like history. What can I say? But anyways, that's another, I think, World War II type historical fiction. I read one of Lynn Austen's books for Christmas. It was like a Christmas book, and I feel like that wasn't a fair representation of her writing. I didn't love the book that was the Christmas book. I forget the name of the book. I'll put it up on the screen, but essentially it wasn't good and it wasn't bad, but like I just want to read another one of her books because I feel like that wasn't a fair representation of her and her writing. So I want to read that. Chasing Shadows by her. I already mentioned that. I also want to try to read The Frozen River by Ariel Lawson. I feel like that would be a great book to read in the winter, hence why it's called The Frozen River. It's another historical fiction book, and essentially it's about this nurse in the 1700s in Maine, but that's all I know about it. And then I also want to read Jamie Jo Wright. I did buy The Lost Boys of Barlow Theater by her, and she's considered like a Christian, like, thriller writer or suspense writer. I don't know exactly, but I have been getting into thrillers recently. But some like secular type thriller authors kind of freak me out, like their writing style, because it's kind of demonic, but like maybe that's just me. So I'm gonna try her out because she's considered a Christian thriller or like suspense writer. So we'll see how that is. I think the last book that I really want to read by the end of this year is Wicked by Gregory Maguire. And I watched like the first Wicked movie last year and I loved it, and it inspired me to go out and buy the book. And I want to read it before the second movie comes out this year. So we'll see if I actually get to all those books. But yeah, that is my little book tag video that I wanted to check in with you about halfway through the reading year and give you some updates about what books I've been reading, what books I'm looking forward to getting to. But yeah, do all the YouTube things that you know how to do, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!